From the City of Angels near the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, investigative reporter Cheryll Jones joins us with an incredible story, followed by Open Lines with Cheryll and me. Here's what's happening. Russia says that it saw the promised delivery of Western tanks to Ukraine as evidence of direct and growing U.S. and European involvement in the conflict. The Kremlin was reacting for the first time to announcements by the United States and Germany that they would arm Ukraine with dozens of battle tanks in its fight against Russia. Getting Pfizer's COVID booster and a flu shot at the same time may raise the risk of a stroke, according to analysis. The FDA found the preliminary link while scouring vaccine injury databases after a separate safety concern was raised about Pfizer's jab. Less than a third of U.S. adults meet suggested benchmarks for aerobic and muscle-building activities set out by health officials, according to a new study. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recommends healthy adults spend at least 150 minutes a week, that's about 20 minutes a day, doing moderate-intensity aerobic exercise and at least 2 days per week doing muscle-strengthening activities. Christian Wild from myheartbook.com with us. Christian, I agree with this. How about you?
Well, yes, George. The more studies that come out continue to emphasize the importance of plain, old, inexpensive daily walks as being critical to our health. And the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recommends adults spend at least 150 minutes per week, and like you say, that's only 20 minutes a day. It doesn't seem that difficult. And according to workout experts, even a shorter 10-minute indoor walking program can actually add years to our lives. For a little extra motivation, here's just a few reasons that getting started with a regular walking program can be beneficial to all of us. As a major study published in JAMA found that in more steps participants over age 40 take every day, the lower their mortality risk from all causes. And taking into account factors such as the subject's health status, researchers discovered a 51% lower mortality risk for those who took 8,000 steps a day compared to those who took 4,000. And the more the subjects walked, the greater the benefit. In fact, extending a walk to 12,000 steps a day was linked to a 65% lower risk of death from all causes. Now that should make a point to all of us. 12,000 steps a day was linked to a 65% lower risk of death. And here is some very good news, George. That a rigorous walk, this is interesting, wasn't required to see these benefits. Low-intensity walks, claimed the article, appear to be just as effective as the higher intensity power walks for the nearly 5,000 study participants. The International Journal of Stroke showed us that those who become fit later in life cut their risk of potentially having a deadly stroke in half.
We're going to talk to you next week, Christian. Christian's website, myheartbook.com. Thank you. The U.S. economy grew faster than expected in the fourth quarter, but that likely exaggerates the nation's health as a measure of domestic demand rose at its slowest pace in 2.5 years, reflecting the impact of higher borrowing costs. This could be the end for struggling retailer Bed Bath & Beyond, as it warned in a regulatory filing that it received a notice of default from its major lender, J.P. Morgan Chase. Shares of Bed Bath & Beyond plunged more than 20% on the news to about $2.56 a share. What's been going on in the skies this week? Let's check in with Kevin Randall. Hey, Mr. Randall, how you doing?
I'm doing good, George. How are you?
Wonderful.
You know, on December 18th of last year, the daughter of the witness was on the outside deck in Stevensville, Montana, when she spotted a set of triangular lights. She called the witness, but the lights were gone. Both witnesses watched the area where the triangle had been, and after a few seconds saw a bright blue flash just as the lights reappeared. The lights rapidly disappeared into the south. Although the witnesses attempted to take a photograph, it was obscured by smoke and lacked detail, and the sighting lasted for about a minute. Not a particularly interesting sighting, except for one thing. They noted that the object they saw looked like photographs taken in the same area on August 30th of last year in Great Falls, Montana. According to the details, the witness was standing on the porch. An object was flashing overhead. The witness thought it was a star or satellite, but stepped off the porch to get a better recording. The object moved slowly, flashing red and top at the bottom every second. While recording, the witness heard a sound, or a loud whirring sound, and the triangular object was in sight for 4 to 5 minutes, and I'll post a picture of that one to my blog. And as you know, I've been reinvestigating some of the classic UFO cases. Tonight, I thought I would mention the sighting by police officer Lonnie Zamora on the outskirts of Socorro, New Mexico on April 24th, 1964. Zamora was drawn to the location by a loud roar that he thought was an explosion in the dynamite shed located there. He came over a crest, and down in an arroyo below him, he saw a white object about the size of a car that he thought had been flipped. But as he got closer and then got out of his patrol car, he saw two beings about the size of a 10-year-old child standing near the object that was egg-shaped. They were in white coveralls. When they saw Zamora, they reacted with surprise and disappeared behind the UFO. Minutes later, it lifted off with a roar, spouting a blue flame. It vanished in seconds, leaving behind a smoking bush, landing gear imprints, and footprints of the creatures. Within 90 minutes or so, both the FBI and the Army interviewed Zamora. They took belated efforts to preserve the landing site, but there had already been several law enforcement officers there, and it wasn't long before sightseers arrived. I'd always said that this sighting would be so much better with their other witnesses. Turns out 3 people had called the police before Zamora's sighting. Although they were never interviewed, they did describe what they had seen to the police dispatcher, and Captain Richard Holder, the Army officer who interviewed Zamora that night, reported on those 3 telephone calls in a document created about midnight. Dr. J. Allen Hynek investigated and had no explanation for what Zamora had seen. More importantly, then Major Hector Quintanilla, chief of Project Blue Book, also investigated. In nearly every case in which a witness reported beings from the craft, the explanation was psychological, meaning there was some sort of problem with the witness. Zamora's sighting is one of only 3 in the Air Force files that involve creatures that was labeled as unidentified. This sighting then has multiple witnesses, landing traces, interaction with the environment, and no satisfactory explanation. And for those who want more detail, my book, Encountering the Desert, has a comprehensive review of the sighting, and that's what we have for tonight, George.
All right, my friend, we'll talk to you next week. As we've been reporting, the rotation of Earth's inner core may have paused, and it could even go into reverse, according to new research. Well, what does this all mean? What does it mean to the planet? What does it mean to us? In a moment, Dr. J. Marvin Herndon joins us as we talk about the rotation of the core. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Dr. J. Marvin Herndon back with us, dubbed by the Washington Post as the maverick geophysicist. His scientific life is characterized by discovering and correcting mistakes made by government-funded scientists, leading to a new understanding of Earth's origin, internal composition, evidence of a nuclear fission reaction as the source of the geomagnetic field, and a new understanding of Earth's surface geology and dynamics. Marvin, welcome back. Good to talk to you.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be on your show.
What is your take, Marv, about this story about the core slowing down, maybe even going into a reverse stage?
Well, the first thing is presumably the data is accurate. We don't know that, okay? Right. But what I can say unambiguously is that the people who report this have absolutely no way of knowing what it means. I don't know for sure what it means, but you know, this goes back a long, long way, George. It goes back almost to the beginning of my
my career in science. The Earth's core was discovered in 1906 by Richard Oldham.
How did he do that?
He was measuring the speed of seismic waves, earthquake waves, and he noticed that when they went through some material in the center of the Earth, they changed speed and direction. Oh. And that was how he discovered that there was something there, presumably a core. Now, over the next 20, 25 years, the dimensions were established quite accurately, and it was discovered that the core was liquid because it would only transmit one of the two types of major earthquake waves.
A liquid metal? Is it like an ocean of liquid metal?
It's like an ocean of liquid iron alloy. Now, this was all fine until the 1930s, early 1930s, and the way the core is with its change in direction and intensity of earthquake waves, there should be a shadow zone sort of on the opposite side of the Earth where you can't detect earthquake waves. But they were detected there, and this was a great mystery. And a lady seismologist named Inga Lehman reasoned the solution. She figured that if there was a solid object at the center of the core, then of a certain size, it would reflect earthquake waves into the shadow zone. And her reasoning was so precise that this was taken as fact, even though it wasn't experimentally verified until 1960. Well, Inga Lehman's discovery of the inner core posed another problem. What is it made of? And this was a real problem. Now, at the time, the geoscientists thought that the Earth was like a certain type of meteorite called an ordinary chondrite. And here's the problem. In ordinary chondrites, there's metal and there's silicate. And the metal almost always contains nickel. All of the nickel is in the metal. And all of the elements heavier than nickel, if put together, could not make a mass as big as the inner core. So what was the inner core? Well, in 1940, Francis Birch figured out what he thought was the answer. It was that solid iron is condensing, crystallizing from the liquid core. And that seemed to make sense until the 1960s, when there was some new evidence discovered in a different type of meteorite, one that I was studying in the 1970s, called an enstatite chondrite. And in some of those meteorites, you have a compound of nickel and silicon, despite all the iron that's around. And it was clear to me that if there was silicon originally in the Earth's core, it would combine with nickel and precipitate, fall out, and end up at the center of the Earth. And I wrote a paper, and I took it to show to Harold Urey. And he read it. As he read it, a smile came on his face. Yes, yes. And then he offered to communicate it to the Proceedings of the Royal Society of London, where it was reviewed and was published. Well, while I was waiting for it to be published, I got to thinking, what's going to happen is there'll be debate and discussion, as there should be with an important new contradiction.
Sure.
And the people with the well-established labs would take it, the idea, and run with it, leave me in the dust because I was just a young guy. Well, that didn't happen. It was as if the paper had never been published. And when the NASA grant that supported the work came up for renewal, it wasn't renewed for no good reason, which put me out of a job because my job depended on that, my university position.
You didn't expect that either, did you?
No, I did not. And I was excommunicated. And what I really realized at that point was that I had crossed a line, that this isn't real science, what government-funded scientists are doing. They're promoting a storyline, and I had they couldn't allow me to challenge that. So, but I was on to something. So instead of just going away or following the party line, maybe getting a job somewhere and just quoting what everybody else was saying, I decided to do research on my own, part-time, at my own expense. And I was able to connect the parts of the inside of the Earth, determined from seismology and moment inertia considerations, to the parts of a particular meteorite, which was virtually proof that the inside of the Earth was like an enstatite chondrite, and that this whole idea would work. Well, this development I continued on and on and on. Then in 1991, I got to thinking about the giant planets, and realized that in the late 1960s, astronomers had discovered that Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune radiate about twice as much energy as they receive from the sun. Now, we were always told that planets don't produce energy to speak of. It's mostly the energy they receive from the sun and then re-radiate it. Well, here was a case where the three giant planets were radiating as much energy as twice as much energy as they were receiving from the sun. And I got to thinking about it, and I realized that Jupiter has all the ingredients for a natural nuclear fission reactor. So I worked out using Fermi's nuclear reactor theory and justified that and published that in the scientific literature.
Well, Marv, the core itself, what's its purpose?
Well, here is the contemporary idea, and this goes back to 1938. I mean, the idea is, and this was an idea that Walter Elsasser had. It was a really good idea. He imagined that there was convection motions in the Earth's core, and those were twisted by planetary rotation, and would cause the Earth's core to act like a dynamo, a magnetic amplifier that would take a small magnetic field and amplify it. And people still believe that. But later on, I started getting into it in detail, and I realized that there's two problems with that idea. One is that convection is impossible in the fluid core because of the compression of the Earth above. The core density is much greater at the bottom of the core than at the top of the core, and just a little bit of heat won't make it light enough to float to the top of the core. Plus, for sustained convection, you have to remove whatever heat is brought up by convection. You have to remove it immediately. But the Earth's core is covered with a rock blanket, the mantle, that has a lower thermal conductivity, a lower heat capacity. It just can't release the heat. So then I began to think, well, what could be causing the geomagnetic field? Now, this is an important question because Albert Einstein had tried to solve that problem, and he was unsuccessful, although he considered it one of the five most important unsolved problems in physics.
You would agree with that.
And the reason that Einstein failed was because the requisite data about a nuclear reactor at the center of the Earth had not yet been discovered. And so this was my discovery, and I started thinking about it, and I realized in the Earth's georeactor, it's called, it's like a two-component assemblage. The main part is like a fluid subshell, or that may be a slurry or a fluid that contains uranium. It contains radioactive waste, and at the very center is the subcore, And that's formed as uranium, the most dense and most gravitationally attracted to the center, precipitates out or separates out, settles out.
Marvin, stay with us for a minute. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and chat more. Plus, we'll take calls with you next hour. Next hour, we'll take your calls with Marvin Herndon as we talk about physics, the Earth's core. What does it mean? Does it create the magnetic field? Probably not. Who knows? We'll check in with him in a moment on Coast to Coast. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you, with Dr. Marvin Herndon with us as we are talking about the Earth's core. There are some scientists that believe that the core is responsible for the magnetic field. I'm not sure you do, Marv. Tell me about that.
No, because the only idea that really makes sense is this idea that of the convection motions twisted by planetary rotations, making a magnetic amplifier. But you can't have convection in the core. But so it doesn't matter. People have still made models. They've spent millions of dollars making mathematical computer models, and they always seem to work, but they can't work. Here's a really strange situation, George. Years ago, say 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it was hard for most people to believe that scientists weren't telling the truth.
Right.
But now, look at what's coming out. I mean, the mainstream media, they have a lot of trouble with the problem of truth. And the blacklisting, the censorship, almost everybody in the public arena practically lies, except the white hats, of course. But so it's not surprising. But the thing that is bad about scientists lying is that they deceive humanity about the real risks. See, if you think about if the Earth's core is about 1/3 of the mass of the entire Earth. So imagine that was actually convecting and you were producing the magnetic field there. That motion would have a huge amount of inertia. I mean, it would be like trying to stop a fully loaded freight train that's the longest in the world and trying to put a stop to it. It would be very difficult.
Is it like a ball?
It's like a ball. And the georeactor is like a ball, but the georeactor, the nuclear reactor at the center of the Earth, is only 1/10,000,000th the mass of the Earth. And so that can principally be stopped quite quickly. Now, there are two things that can upset the convection in the georeactor. One is a big meteorite impact at the surface of the Earth would cause it to disturb the fluid motions. But another thing is great outbursts from the sun. You know, we live in a world where the sun is not just a quiet producer of energy. There's solar flares, there's corona discharges, charged particles that pass through the Earth and that pass around the Earth. Usually the magnetic field deflects those. But what happens also is that when you have such a bunch of charged particles hitting the Earth's magnetic field, it induces a current in the georeactor, which can destabilize it, which can upset the Earth's magnetic field, and even possibly shut it down.
Well, if it does shut down, if it stops moving as they think it could be, what does that mean to us?
Well, if the magnetic field stops, and it's not in the fluid core, it's in the georeactor. What you would have widespread communications disruptions, GPS blackouts,
birds smashing into walls, right?
Satellite failures, loss of electrical power, loss of electrical transmission control.
Will we have time to see it coming?
No, and this is what the problem is. This is what the real problem is. No one's really preparing for it because they think that the Earth's magnetic field is being created in this massive fluid core that can't change quickly. but it can change quickly. And I've only mentioned a few of the things that are the problems.
Is it changing yet?
It's been changing over the last 100 years. The intensity of the magnetic field is about half what it was 100 years ago. And you've probably heard people talking about the movement of the magnetic North Pole.
Yes.
That's increased in movement.
It's shifting.
And that may be an indication. And so people should really be trying to understand exactly what the georeactor is telling us about the potential for a shutdown. But they're pretending that it all happens in the Earth's core. I mean, it's nonsense science.
This is serious business, isn't it?
It is serious business. A geomagnetic field collapse could cause such hardship and suffering and potentially reverse more than 2 centuries of technological infrastructure development. The last magnetic reversal occurred about 780,000 years ago. Now, humans at that time, I believe, were basically cavemen, and cave women too. I don't want to leave anybody out.
We get it.
but I mean, they weren't a technological society. I mean, right now everything we do is connected to technology, and so if all of a sudden the Earth's magnetic field started collapsing, no one's prepared for it, and no one's studying it, and no one is understanding, because this is the message that really should be getting to the people who are concerned about the infrastructure.
How can we prepare for it, Marv?
Well, one thing you have to keep in mind that when these charged particles get so intense they come through the magnetic field, they can induce currents in long wires like electrical power systems, which can blow out transformers and other pieces of equipment. And just and this is seen in a little tiny bit when there's a large outburst. Occasionally, a power system will go down, and maybe a transformer will go out, which takes about 6 months to rebuild another one. And no one's really prepared.
We don't even have them in this country. They come out of China, don't they?
or Switzerland or someplace, and they're usually custom made. So I mean, we just can't get one off the shelf. And there's so many problems. And what we're doing is we're doing stupid things. We're sending billions of dollars to create a war in Ukraine. That could be solving people problems over here, because it could. We're spending vast amounts of money that we should be making. The science should really be a mechanism to improve life on Earth, and in many cases it has. I mean, for example, in treating disease. But the dark side of science is that the monsters, the really human monsters, are making viruses worse than occur in nature so they can be used as germ warfare.
Well, do you agree with the scientists that the core itself is slowing down?
Well, I don't.
Who knows, right?
Who knows? Number one, and number two, it may be that could tell you something about what is going to happen with the magnetic field. That would be nice to know. But the problem is that you have to look at that in terms of understanding the true science. And that's one of the things that needs to be done. Another thing that there's helium that's produced by the georeactor, and it comes up in deep source volcanoes like powering Hawaii and Iceland. And that helium is a reflection. It's produced by the georeactor and makes its way up. and that composition reflects the current state of the georeactor. But the data has not been precise. It's just measurements here and there. But it looks like we are leading toward the end of the life of the georeactor. And does that mean it'll stop in 100 years, or maybe 1,000, or maybe a million years from now? We don't know.
Is a planet dead when its reactor stops?
Pretty much. This is what's happened with the planet Mars. Its reactor died, and its decompression. When planets form initially, they are typically compressed by the ices and gases. Like at one point in its early life, Earth was more like Jupiter. It had like 300 Earth masses of gases compressing what we call Earth to about 2/3 of the diameter. And when the sun ignited and blew away all the gases, it began a process of decompression. And this is the process that drives all of geology. I mean, as the planet decompresses, its surface area has to increase. It increases by making cracks, and those cracks expand and get filled in, and that's the ocean basins that are formed. And the curvature also has to change. I mean, if you took a half of an orange, the peel, and set it on a bigger melon, it wouldn't lay flat. And the reason is because of the curvature. Well, for the curvature to make it lay flat, you could take tucks in it and fold it over, and you could find that there are little tears around the edges. And this is exactly what's happened on Earth. Those are the reason that you have the mountains that are characterized by folding, and the little tears that are seen are the reason that Norway, for example, has all the fjords, and that you have submarine canyons. It's part of understanding how the whole planetary system works.
Is anybody panicking, Marvin, over this last report?
No, I think there's a lot of mystery because you remember the science fiction movie The Core?
Yeah.
Well,
they had to go down into the core to get it moving again.
Yeah,
right?
The premise was that it had stopped. The core had stopped rotating.
Right. It was like a little planet within a planet.
Yeah, and so that's. But of course, that's not what makes the magnetic field work. But people have in their mind this kind of story from movies, and I think there are other movies besides The Core that use that planet, the rotation of the core. But no, that's just.
Is there like a big hole in the center of the Earth?
No, in the center of the Earth, there's the nuclear fission georeactor. It's like imagine a ball of uranium surrounded by an even bigger ball of uranium mixed with decay products and.
Is it glowing?
Well, yes, it would be because the Earth's the temperature in the Earth's core is about 6,000 degrees.
And it is it like a huge crevice, or is it just part of the?
No, it's very compressed.
It is, okay.
It's very compressed.
So the planet itself, if you go down to the middle of the planet, if you're able to get 4,000 miles down there, or whatever this is,
yes,
would you see a big gap in the planet or nothing?
No. What you would do, you would be ending up where in the nuclear subcore where the fission is taking place. And that would be very dense, but that would be where the energy was being produced. And then if you look further, you would see a layer, a much thicker layer around that's in motion driven by the heat. And that then is in contact with the lower limit of the inner core. And the inner core acts as a big heat sink. So as the subshell fluid moves up by convection, it hits the inner core, and that takes away the heat, so it then falls back in. And this is the motion, coupled with planetary motion, that generates the Earth's magnetic field. And there are lots of charged particles there that are moving and making little mini fields that can be amplified.
If I remember the movie from the core, they had a machine that could auger out the planet where they went down in this little capsule, right?
Right, and it was made of unobtainium.
Exactly.
But that was a really fun movie. I didn't get to meet the director until it was already in the can. But it was a fun movie.
Was it accurate?
No, it was a lot of things were wrong with it.
That's what I mean,
a lot of things. And if I had been involved from the very beginning, it would have been a lot different. But see, here's the story, George. I was remember, and we go back a long way. In 2002, the August issue of Discover magazine, my work about the reactor at the center of the Earth was the cover story.
That's right.
And the first person that called me, even before my copy arrived, was Lisa Lyons.
My executive producer. That's right. Hold on, Marv. We're at the top of the hour. We'll come back and talk more about that, and we'll take phone calls with you. Well, this hour we'll open up the phone lines and take your calls with Dr. Marvin Herndon in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, along with Dr. Marvin Herndon. Marvin, when that Discover magazine came out, and it talked about you talking about the reactor in the core of the planet, what was the reaction to that?
Well, in one sense, it was really a good reaction because people all over the world realized that this was good science. The reaction from the science community, the geoscience community, the government-funded scientists, were that they just refused to acknowledge it. Now, NASA, I even tried to apply for a NASA grant, and NASA, the panel that rated my proposal, ranked it number one of 120. No, I'm sorry, ranked it number
120
of 120 proposals.
Oh, jeez.
And all of those people were funded, though. Their institutions were funded by the same the same program I was applying to.
But you weren't.
But of course they didn't fund the research. But it's even worse than that. There's a lot of reason that the idea of a planetary nuclear reactor or a reactor in large moons is a good solid concept. But to my knowledge, I do not know of a single NASA-supported scientific paper in 30 years that has cited that idea. I mean, it's like I'm a nobody.
You're an outcast.
I'm an outcast. However, I just published a couple of papers. You know, one of them had to do with the moon. You know, you look at the moon and you see those dark spots on it, those dark areas. Some people say they see a face in them.
Yeah.
That's basaltic lava, and the rest of it's like an aluminum silicate.
It was active at one point, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but here's the thing, that what was discovered on the opposite side of the moon is that there's none of that.
Why not?
Well, that was the big question, and people have tried to make up arguments that knowing only the things that they know about the moon, namely that you had some volcanoes and that you had meteorite impacts. But there was nothing logical. Now, I looked at the problem a little bit differently. In 65 million years ago, there was a massive outpouring of lava in India. It's called the Deccan Traps, and that lava has helium in it that has the signature of helium produced by the georeactor. 250 million years ago, there was a major outpouring of lava in Siberia called the Siberian Traps, and it too has the signature, the helium signature of heat that was produced by the georeactor, causing all that massive lava flow. And so I realized that the moon at one time had a magnetic field during its first maybe 500 million years.
And what happened to it?
Well, it died because it was just a small reactor.
Mm-hmm.
But it would produce heat, and it would produce lava that would flow out like flowed out in India and in Siberia on the Earth. But the interesting thing is that the center of the moon, the gravitational center, is not at the center of the moon. It's displaced 2 kilometers toward the Earth, because it's really the center of mass of the two objects. And so when you consider the gravitational attraction of the Earth and the displacement of the center toward the Earth, then it makes sense that lava would flow only toward the side of the moon that constantly faces the Earth. And so I published that and even suggested that a way to verify that by drilling into the lava deep enough so the effects of solar implanted material wouldn't count, and there to find helium isotopes, and that would prove that. This is something that NASA never considered.
Yeah, it was right under their nose. Let's take some calls here for you, Marv. Let's pick it up by going to Steve in Albany, New York. Welcome to the program. Hello, Stephen.
Hey, George. It's good to talk to you again.
You too.
One of these nights I would love to be put on with a conference call with Cornelius. I love the guy. The guy sounds very much like me and his woes in the military. I almost was thrown out of the military.
One day during open lines, and if he calls in, we'll do that.
Yeah, and this is what I wanted to talk about. Maybe Dr. Herndon, can shed some light on something you always talk about. Do you remember Oumuamua?
Yep.
Yeah. Oumuamua came down, went straight to Jupiter, lingered there for a while, and then took off. Okay, this would be like those battery chargers that you put your phone on that don't have direct contact, or possibly this was my idea, or possibly those toothbrush chargers. I had one that don't have direct contact, and this is what I was thinking of. Then all of a sudden, the doctor mentioned that there's a power plant inside Jupiter. Maybe it was charging batteries. It came in, charged batteries, and then took off. And maybe the reason why we see a lot of these, let's just call them alien spacecraft, coming to Earth is because this Earth is possibly a charging station for them.
Far out theory. What do you think, Marv?
I don't know I can add anything to that. I've always been fascinated at reports of observations like that, but I've just focused on the kind of science I can get my hands on. And so I don't know. I couldn't add anything to what this fellow's saying.
Professor Avi Loeb believes that Oumuamua, the strange object out there, is some kind of artificial object.
I can't say anything to that. I just don't follow the literature well enough.
Next up, let's go to Marty in Oklahoma. Marty, welcome to the show.
Hello, George. How are you doing this evening?
Great, Marty. Thank you.
Great. Dr. Herndon, just wanted to make sure that I've got my physics correct here. Right at the dead center point of the Earth, essentially gravity's zero. Things are floating, and this is what gives you the ability of molecular gravitational attraction and the gravitational sort that allows, say, uranium and whatnot to form the core of the georeactor. Am I on track with this?
Yeah, you're on track because this is crucial. This is what you would refer to as a microgravity environment, and so this is why you can have the convection motions and things like that, and you can have the uranium settling out because it is a microgravity environment, and that's an important characteristic.
Most scientists would tend to believe that the core is magnetic. You don't, but you've had some supporters as well, haven't you?
Well, the core of the Earth can't be magnetic for the following reason: it's too hot. It's too hot. You can only have a permanent magnet when like an iron bar is cool enough that
cools it down.
That it's below like 700 degrees centigrade. It's called the Curie point when you lose magnetism when you heat it. So the core can't be a permanent magnet, and this was one of the big mysteries. So how can you be generating the magnetic field? And it was a great idea that Elsasser had, but he only knew at the time. He only knew that there was one fluid area in the core, being the core. He didn't know about the georeactor because that hadn't been even conceived of at the time.
Let's go to Eric in Indiana. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Hello, George. How are you this morning?
Okay. You driving safely, I trust?
Oh, yes, sir. You betcha.
All righty.
Hey, I'd like to ask your guest, he was talking about the moon a while ago. When the moon rises, he was talking about seeing that face in the moon. But when it sets in the southwest, when it rises in the east, I'm sorry, did I say that? West. But anyway, when the moon sets in the west, you see a different view of the moon. Is that the back side, or what side is that? But you don't see the face anymore.
The one thing that's the characteristic of the moon is that the same face is always facing the Earth. Now, depending on the atmosphere, for example, the angle that you're looking at it, the haze in the atmosphere, it might appear a little bit different. But it's always the same. I say face of the moon. I mean the same side. I've never really been able to see the face people imagine from those dark areas.
I've seen a little bit of it. And isn't it true when the sun sets, it comes up as the moon? I'm kidding.
I don't.
Saw that on a TV show.
But the moon is fascinating, and what I can no longer look at the moon without thinking about the idea of the lava coming out only on this side of the moon. It makes sense.
We're taking your calls with Dr. Marvin Herndon. His website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. He's got some books. I've got the last book you wrote, NASA, Politics Above Science. Is there any others?
No, that was back in
that was in
2009 or so. Or there's several recent ones, but the one that I would like to point out that's of most interest to science is called Paradigm Shifts. And that's actually someone in Spain and also someone in France realized that it was such an important book that they voluntarily translated it into French and into Spanish.
How about that?
And these can be purchased reasonably from Amazon.com. They're shown on my website. You just click on them, and I think you'll get a link to them. But there's no other book like it because I've taken all of my 50 years of experience in science, and by showing what the world is really like and how the community perceived it, I've also shown how to actually make scientific discoveries. And that's not taught in school. I could tell you one real simply.
Sure.
Back in the 80s, there was a catchphrase, "What's wrong with this picture?" You remember the movie The Terminator?
I sure do.
When he lands on the Earth and one of the guys says, "Hey, what's wrong with this picture?" Well, you asked that question about a science problem, and that's a first way to begin to make a discovery, because when things aren't correct, when they don't fit together, they don't seem to add up. Well, that's the first clue that there's something wrong, and you find out what is wrong, and you begin to make a discovery. That's just, they don't teach these things in school.
No.
But I've tried in this little book to progress through both the understanding of the inside of the Earth, the magnetic field, how the Earth behaves, and a section about how stars are ignited, how galaxies are ignited, and then I even speculate, and anything about how the universe formed has to be speculation, but admirable speculation, according to Galileo, is a great thing. I speculate on the origin of the universe, and it's not something that all of a sudden came to being from a point of nothingness. It's an entirely different picture.
One day when we have a different program, Marv, let's talk about the Big Bang. Maybe you can explain it to me, because I don't get it.
I can explain what people think about it, but I don't get it either, because it's nonsense.
Exactly. Jesse's with us in Durango, Colorado, west of the Rockies. Hey, Jess, go ahead.
Hi, gentlemen. I hope you had a happy New Year and nice visiting with you. Reason I was called was when I was growing up, the moon or the Polaris and the Big Dipper and Cassiopeia and stuff never came out of northern Canada. It is now sitting over the top of Durango, or at least at my house.
It's moved.
Yeah, we moved. We're in a full-blown global shift. When I was working special duty, I had part of a project where I came across paperwork that had been done in 47 and calculations on how fast the Earth will shift and do a minimum 90-degree switchover. That's why the trucker keeps seeing the moon at a different angle as well as everybody else does. But with all the cloud cover and the chemtrails, they keep covering up most of the information, and all the white light blinds anybody out there.
Go ahead, Marv. What?
I haven't been able to get a good look at the sky in years because of the chemtrails. Which, incidentally, I've written a couple of books about chemtrails, and they're on the website as well. And they're co-authored with Mark Whiteside, a physician, the public health director of the Florida Public Health Service in Key West. And that's good, solid information. And there's a problem. You can't see the sky anymore.
Marv, we got a couple minutes before the break, but what got you into this entire field when you were a youngster? What was the admiration about all this?
Well, I think what it was that my father had abandoned our family.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
And this was, in 1950 or so, a divorce was very rare, and
abandonment was rare.
It was very rare. So I guess I took solace in just the world around me, nature around me.
Did you ever connect with your father later in life?
Yeah, actually I did, because I got a notice that someone was filing to be his conservator. He was in an old folks' home, and somebody was filing for that, and they had to contact me. And so I went to the city where he lived and went to the court, and the court appointed me his conservator.
So you met him again. Was it emotional for you?
Well, was it seemed like such a loss. But it was he was not in very good health, and he died shortly thereafter.
That's it. It was his loss, though, Marv. You know that.
It was his loss. I mean, family is the most important thing you can have.
Absolutely, Marv. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and chat more and take final calls with you in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Next, our investigative reporter Cheryll Jones joins us with some incredible stories about AI, artificial intelligence. Make sure you're part of the program. We're going to come back and take final calls with Dr. Marvin Herndon in a moment on Coast to Coast. Don't forget his website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. And welcome back to our final segment with Dr. Marvin Herndon as we talk about the core. I love this story, Marvin. How did you come up with your theories?
Well, I started when I was in graduate school. I decided to study meteorites, and as part of my research, and meteorites were formed about the same time as the solar system.
Sure.
And some of them,
fragments of planets and stuff like that.
And there are a lot of different kinds, and some of them have almost all of the same elements as the sun, except for the gases, the volatiles, which means that they were very primitive. And so I thought, well, this is a way to begin to understand how the solar system formed. Well, other people had been doing that, but I went about it a little bit differently, and I looked at things that most people ignored. And the first really important thing was what I talked about earlier about the Earth's inner core. And whenever you find something that is quite a conflict, something different, I mean, the responsibility of the scientific community is to try to figure out if it's wrong, to refute it. And if they can't refute it, then they should cite it. They should acknowledge it in further publications on the subject so other people will learn about it and be able perhaps to extend it and make more discoveries. Well, I was shut out of that, and I just progressed from one thing to the other. I mean, when you make a discovery that's new, it often opens new possibilities, new ideas of potentially other studies. Let me tell you a quick story that I think is
Sure.
really, really interesting. When I had published the paper about Jupiter having a nuclear reactor at its center, I got to thinking, well, Jupiter is like a small star that was too small to have ignited. And then I thought, well, a star is like a hydrogen bomb that is held together by gravity.
Mm-hmm.
And every single hydrogen bomb is ignited by a nuclear fission chain reaction, a little nuclear reactor. And so I wondered, hey, is it possible that stars are ignited by nuclear fission? I thought, oh, this is so obvious. Because the people who had worked on the thermonuclear reactions that power the stars were the same people who made real advances in military nuclear weapons. Hans Bethe, Edward Teller, the father of the atomic bomb.
Sure.
But anyway, I went to the library and methodically searched the literature. And I could find no paper about the thermonuclear ignition of stars by nuclear fission. And so I even hired a librarian to do a computer lit search of all the databases. The same thing. Well, I wrote up a short paper and submitted it to a number of journals. It was rejected at a number of journals. One of the rejections was based upon a reviewer, an anonymous reviewer, saying that Herndon is throwing away 40 years of astrophysics. Well, that's what a really important discovery does. But it was eventually published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society of London. And that led to another discovery. You see, the idea that people had was that the million-degree temperatures necessary to ignite the thermonuclear reactions would occur when the dust and gas collapsed to form the star. It would get hot. Well, in 1967, a couple of Japanese scientists showed that, no, you wouldn't get to 1 million degrees. And the reason is because the heating the surface by the infall of matter is offset by radiation from the surface, which is a function of the fourth power of temperature. In other words, T times T times T times T. And when T is 1 million degrees, that's a huge loss factor. So I published that idea, but then I realized that except for the little tiny brown dwarfs, people in the astrophysics community thought that all stars ignite when the gravitational collapse. And I said, no, it's only if there are fissionable elements present. And so this led to a whole different understanding about the galaxies. Because galaxies, you picture the starfish kind of shape of a spiral galaxy. Well, that's unstable, and it would wrap around its center. So even the astrophysics community would say that, there has to be like a big shell of a halo around of some kind of dark matter. And they didn't have any idea what that dark matter was. Well, to me, the dark matter was stars that had not yet been ignited because they had no fissionable elements. And so this then led to the idea that the galaxies the luminous stars in galaxies come about because galaxies shoot out jets. And these jets of nuclear matter, when they contact the stars, they seed the stars with fissionable elements and then light up the stars. So when you look at a galaxy, you see all these looks like paths of where the jets were and lighted the stars.
And it's gorgeous.
And it's really a beautiful understanding. And the remarkable thing is, you ask the question, what would a galaxy look like when it shoots out its first jet? Well, if you go to the very famous image of the mice galaxies, which are two galaxies very close together, one of them just looks like it has a tail. Well, that tail is where the first jet ignited the stars in its path. And so all of this makes sense. And you look at a deep field view from, say, the Hubble Space Telescope that may contain 50,000 galaxies. And there are two common points to be made. One is there are very few different types of galaxies, which indicates a commonality of formation. And the other is that most of them appear flat. Well, that's because they appear flat because that's just the ignited stars, whereas the dark stars around them would make for spherical galaxies.
Well done. Let's go to final calls. Let's go to Henry in the state of Washington, first-time caller. Hey, Henry, go ahead, sir.
Hello. I sure enjoyed the show, but you did make a statement that's absolutely not true, that transformers aren't made in the United States. The very, very vast majority are made in two factories by ABB. One is in Jefferson City, Missouri. The other is in New South, Boston, West Virginia. And I happen to have built the test rooms where they do the power density test to make sure there's no short in them when they put them together before they ship them.
Oh, most of them, though, Henry, come from China?
No, absolutely not.
We were always told
I stand corrected. Thank you.
Yeah, being in the industry, that really upset me.
Well, no, I'll tell you. The one thing that is important to me, And I never object to being corrected if the correction is well intended and it's true, because that's how you learn. And so that's important. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Next up, thanks, Henry. Let's go to Gordon in Plant City, Florida. Hey, Gordy, go ahead.
George, Dr. Herndon, thanks for taking my call. Earlier, you were mentioning about the core of the Earth doing a pole flip. Of course, the Earth's magnetic field would fall. Now, I wrote a scientific paper on that, and just about a few weeks ago, I got Contract with America Part 2 registered as a registered trademark, and I'm picking up the mantle of, but this time trying to correct the problems and tell the lawmakers to protect the grid. So my question is basically, I wonder if anyone has heard anything from the EMP task force. Now, if they become too vocal and do their job too well, Congress could actually shut them down because, as you guys well know, Dr. Peter Pry, who just passed away, said Washington is broken. And my fear is that since Washington created the EMP task force, they could shut them down. And I'm just wondering if that has anything to do with why we haven't heard anything from them. And I've looked at their website. But whether they do their job or not, I'd like to ask both of you. And by the way, I wonder if now would be a good time for me to call in the chip and throw my website out. But
no.
Since I've written a scientific paper on this thing and you have a copy of it, I'll let that be your call. The poles are definitely going to flip within like the next few hundred years, according to all of my analysis. You can look at it. We don't know why, but we need to protect the grid. We need to get the lawmakers. And more than that, the lawmakers are not going to help us, I don't think, and we need to protect our own grid.
Well, as you know, Gordon, we've been talking about that for 20 years now to try to get the grid insulated and protected. And still, Marvin, that hasn't happened.
It hasn't happened, and one of the reasons is because the scientific community continues with this old 1939 idea about the origin of the Earth's magnetic field, and they don't have a clue of what really can cause the Earth's magnetic field to shut down. And so it's a sad situation, because it will change everybody's life when that happens.
That sure is. East of the Rockies, let's go to Carlos in Miami. Welcome to the show. Hi, Carlos. Go ahead.
Hey, George. Good morning. Good morning, Doctor. I'm the one that gave you the theory where we were ejected from a black hole, and then afterwards there was the Big Bang, and you love that one. I don't know if you recall that, but I wanted to share that also with the doctor. My question, doctors, I'm a little bit confused because lately, they discovered that there's more water under the Earth's crust than there are in the oceans. So that means that the crust is also floating on water. And then you're saying that you have liquefied metal, like volcanic lava, in the center core.
Let me correct that, if you would. The water that they're talking about is water that's part of a mineral. I mean, minerals often have water associated with them, and that's what they're really talking about. They're not talking about pools of liquid water.
By the way, Marv, I'm a little concerned because Tom just dug up some information that says that China is the world's leading supplier of advanced grid components for ultra-high voltage systems.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. China supplies just about everything. You know, the U.S., the management people decided it would be much easier just to do paper transactions and let China do all the manufacturing. And, of course, that took away the jobs, and it took away the ability of a lot of people to make important contributions and improvements. So it wouldn't surprise me that China is a major player in that.
Let's get a quick question in from Terry in Dallas. Go ahead, Terry.
Hello, George and Dr. Herndon. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I have three things to cover real quick.
Just go. Let's go with one first. We only have a couple minutes left. Go for it.
Okay. Well, I was going to tell what the caller. He said that the face looked different from when it came up in the east and settled in the west. Dr. Herndon, when since the moon is not turning and you're looking at the same side all the time, wouldn't you be looking at the top would now be the bottom when it's set in the west from when it came up in the east? Also, real quick, when, the moon, when it's a full moon, they said it has effect on the tides and people go a little crazy and stuff. Why does that happen on a full moon when the moon is always full? It's just dark.
We'll take a quick stab at that, Marv, before we're done. We've got a minute left.
That's actually a good question. No, there are times when the it often connects also with where the sun is, because you're getting gravitational pull from the sun and from the moon. So I think the real question of what's the when the tides are most max is not only where the moon is, but where the sun also is, and I can't give you anything better than that.
Marv, we are out of time. I applaud you for your work. Keep in touch with us, okay?
Well, thank you, George, and I appreciate the invitation, because I think you do a real service to people, to humanity.
Well, we love getting out the information, that's to be sure. Up next, investigative reporter Cheryll Jones joins us as we talk about artificial intelligence. How far will it go, and what will it do to all of us? And then we'll take open lines with Cheryl after her report on Coast to Coast. Up next, our investigative reporter Cheryll Jones joins us with an incredible story. So we'll get right into it. And then in our last hour, we'll have open lines with her, and I'll be there too on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. To those of you who are new to the program who do not know who investigative reporter Cheryll Jones is, she's been a news anchor and meteorologist for the networks of CNN and the Weather Channel. She has worked in multiple markets in various capacities, has interests in hard news, controversies, conspiracies, and the unexplained. And she is one of the only TV journalists to be both a news anchor and a degreed meteorologist at the network level. Cheryl, whatever got you into meteorology in the first place?
Oh, I just liked watching clouds and seeing all the different formations and things that you could imagine out of the sky. But it was very interesting to me with all of the weather changes and weather systems. So one thing led to another, and there you go.
Were you one of those little girls who loved the weather?
I did, but I wasn't totally obsessed with it. But I was rather curious about everything around me, to be honest.
Well, and it shows now, because you're still curious about a lot of things, right?
That's the problem. I'm too curious.
Well, I don't even think it's a problem. It's probably an asset to be able to do that. It keeps you doing what you do.
You have to be a little flexible, a little nimble on your feet at times. Hopefully I am, so I try.
Well, this week we're talking about the power of artificial intelligence and everything else, and AI is coming along really fast. People are talking about it every day. Do you hear these things?
Oh, absolutely, and it is every day when you hear something new, it's scarier and scarier, and I'm going to have a two-part series this time, George. Tonight I'll have part one of my two-part series on transhumanism and AI with filmmaker Frank Jacob from Germany visiting us, and that will be focused on digitalization. And the second part will be next month. That will be on our neural rights, on keeping the mind free, or free will, neural rights pertaining to the brain, with author and exoconsciousness expert Rebecca Hardcastle-Wright. But tonight, starting out with Frank Jacob. He's an internationally acclaimed filmmaker, speaker, and researcher into the future of the human species. And we have a question. Where in the world is humanity heading? Did Ozzy Osbourne have it right when we said we're going off the rails like a crazy train? The media sells it, and then we live the roles? He might have been onto something. Well, tonight, Frank talks about the roles created by two main timelines, one organic or more natural, the other synthetic or manipulated and controlled. The first one takes us to a place where humans finally realize we have an unfulfilled potential. But the other one, where digital currency takes total control and command of our privacy and puts us on the brink of transhumanism, is the focus. So Frank shines a light on who and what is behind it all. Will we choose utopia or dystopia in the coming age of digitalization?
Hello, Frank. Welcome to Coast.
Thanks for having me, Cheryl.
Can you explain to us what the coming utopian age of digitalization is and why you feel it's so important that people know more about it than is generally being revealed to people right now?
Well, the coming utopian age of digitalization, it's kind of a sarcastic term that I loosely put together based on a presentation that I did in Switzerland back in October. I was asked to kind of put together an overview of where things are going with respect to digitization in society, everything from biological digitization all the way to financial digitization. So I think, what it's leading to, where we're heading in the society right now, globally, really, it isn't really any longer one country or a couple of countries. It's really turned into a global movement. We're heading into a world that's really kind of dystopian, and that is a world where there's no longer going to be any privacy. There's the whole idea of even natural functionality of your body, like the right for you to determine what you take into your body and what you don't want to take in your body. It all ties in to connecting us to what's called the Internet of Bodies. And they're trying to turn global society into this whole great reset model based on Agenda 21, stakeholder capitalism. And I think it's a critical subject for us to be talking about now, because really what we have is a point of no return approaching, where I think once they implement a certain threshold of things, like, for example, digital currencies, there's not really going to be a way back. It's going to be very hard to turn the clock back. And once that happens, I think people are going to be shocked when they see the full extent of it. And so we need to be talking about it now before it gets to that point. I have this feeling that people are not really aware of what's coming down the pipeline, or maybe not aware of the whole spiritual consequence of it, the whole societal changes that are coming at us right now. And if we have this window of time to have this discussion, we should take it now. That's why I think it's so important.
You're joining us tonight from Germany, and you mentioned the global digitalization that's happening. How many other countries are already actively on board with this? What's the status?
I think the major one that is coming soon is the central banking digital currencies, and that is coming into a lot of Western nations. I think there's over 45 nations, major Western nations in the world right now, who either already have pilot programs in place or are already testing their own version of a digital dollar. In fact, in the United States, a digital dollar is being tested right now. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York put together a conglomerate of different companies to do like a 12-week experiment, which is, I think, running right now. Actually, it's right in the middle of it, to kind of test out digital currencies, the move toward a digital dollar. So this is going to happen in stages, but there'll be kind of a point where it'll happen very quickly. And a lot of people have this feeling that it's going to be something which is going to be triggered by a major event of some kind.
Frank, when did this social engineering project called the New World Order of digitalization actually start?
Well, I mean, I like to say that it actually went all the way back to 100 years now. I would say almost at the time of the first, if not the First World War, I would say, since technology wasn't really where it is now. The visions were there, though. But I would say at the conclusion of the Second World War, you could say symbolically represented the end of kind of nation states and the rush toward globalization. And so along with globalization is all of this Agenda 21 stuff. You could see the trend in society building toward, they were creating a more of a global economy, and they poo-pooed any countries that would stand up for their national sovereignty. I mean, nationalism's almost become a dirty word now in our modern world. And I guess you could say that Germany under the National Socialists was like, the most successful final experiment in nationhood in the modern time, I guess the 20th century, where they successfully achieved a certain level of sovereignty and prosperity and cultural and technological leaps forward that no other country had achieved. And this at a time when most other countries were still kind of reeling from the Depression. So, and when that was erased, it was kind of like the beginning of the end of all of that. So now we have this globalist society. And of course, with that comes the whole idea of, if you take us away from nationhood, nationhood is by extent really just another, version of, it goes all the way from the family unit to the community, to the county, to the, to the cities, to the states, and then all the way to the boundaries of the country. If they're eroding the idea of nationhood, then they're eroding the idea of family as well. And I think we're seeing that pretty clearly in society right now, with the move away from the idea of there's really these solid foundations that have built our world. They're eroding very quickly. Everything from racism, and then of course comes in climate change, which they're using, the auspice of man-made climate change to drive a lot of their stakeholder capitalism, this whole idea of moving toward the green world. All of it's based on these think tanks that are put together by so-called authorities, and they're moving along so quickly that I don't even think government officials can keep up. In fact, most government officials, I would say, don't even really understand a lot about the global situation, and they just get together with these consultants who brief them. And so, what are they going to accept as truth? They're going to be taking these people as experts, and if they don't do their own research, I mean, do they have time for research these days? Who does their research anymore, right? So these things are all in the way of putting up blocks for us moving toward this new global world.
What does a great reset, as described by the WEF, the World Economic Forum, have to do with timelines?
For us, in order to be able to interact individually as people with other people, we have to have certain commonalities, which I call consensus. So, the same political leaders in the same country that we can complain about or praise, whatever. I mean, we have to have these commonalities. So there's that kind of a consensus, which means that there's certain points that we all agree on for us to be able to navigate. And these can be broken down, what I call, into two different consensus timeline. One of them is what I call the organic timeline, and the other is the artificial or the synthetic timeline. And these are going to be the two defining directions that society goes into. And the World Economic Forum is really essentially represents that synthetic timeline, that idea, cashless, digital government, artificial intelligence, transhumanism is the key word here. So this is the direction that the World Economic Forum is driving us. And so this is why timelines have a lot to do with the World Economic Forum. And I try to really make it clear that as abstract as the subject matter of timelines is, it's very, very concrete in terms of what's going on around in our world right now. And how do we navigate that? And how can we use the idea of timelines, to do something about it? How can we identify the timelines? What are the key points that we can use? And that's the kind of thing. So I think the World Economic Forum is a great place to kind of start to look at what's going on in the world and what the trend is, because they're the driving force behind where a lot of governments are going. Like I was saying earlier, the people out of these consultants, the government officials go to, they tend to be part of the World Economic Forum. And in fact, even Klaus Schwab is proudly proclaiming that they have members of the World Economic Forum graduates that have been at their various forums over the decades implanted within, many of the Western governments, so that they proudly can proclaim that they are actually influencing the direction of every single country with respect to their agenda from within, like the Trojan horse concept.
Why do you say there are two main timelines? Would there not be an infinite number of timelines that would be possible?
I mean, yes, there are. You could say each of us has our own universe, our own infinite version of our timeline. However, because we interact with people and we basically go into resonance with ideologies, technologies, ideas, anything that's sort of out there in the world that we see and that we experience and witness, we each individually have the opportunity to, by what I mean going into resonance with here, I mean is if you agree with something out there, if you like something out there, it's like a tuning fork, you kind of like go into resonance, because we're these frequency beings on a spiritual level. We're made up of frequency, and quantum physics is showing us more and more that we're not just flesh and bones, but that we actually extend outward even beyond the physical realm into other dimensions. And so timelines play in and out of these dimensions. And so we go into resonance with ideologies that represent one of those two timelines, which I was describing. One of them being the organic timeline, meaning the idea that we have an unfulfilled potential as human beings. Some people call it the quantum evolutionary leap that we have coming, like that have been talked about by, like, the Mayas, for example, talked about it, and other indigenous cultures have always sort of put this time as being a time where we're going to make this huge leap that's unlike anything else humanity's ever made before. It's not like we're just going to have cooler toys, better technology. We're actually going to make a leap on a spiritual level, so that we're going to be unlocking certain capabilities and potentials that only very few people of us have right now, that give us a glimpse where this organic timeline could go in terms of people that are psychically gifted, that have telepathic abilities, psychokinetic abilities. There's even some shows about these kinds of people. So that's like the one timeline that I would say is the major timeline that we have yet to manifest. And that's going up against that artificial transhumanist timeline, which looks at our human biology as something which is flawed, which is limited, which has problems, and death being one of them. One of the things that the proponents of the transhumanist timeline are all excited about is immortality. They want to become these immortal gods. And Yuval Harari, being one of the, main people behind promoting these ideologies on the World Economic Forum, talks about us becoming gods. He has this saying, history started when we invented gods, and history will end when we become gods. I mean, these people think this way, right? So, this is what we're up against. And unfortunately, the overwhelming majority is being sucked into this technologically driven transhumanist timeline more than they are into the organic biological timeline, because it takes work to kind of have to work on yourself. These are things that we have to put effort into to try and develop spiritually. They aren't just handed to us on a golden platter. We should all be talking about this. This is life and death of humanity. Nothing less than that. It's crazy that I'm saying that, but it really is nothing less.
He's really into this, isn't he?
He sure is. What he says is very scary and concerning, and it is the talk of the town, so to speak. A lot is being said about it, and especially this year when the World Economic Forum is more publicized. There's more in the mainstream media about it than ever before, and people are learning more about what's going on and what the globalists do and talk about and plan when they have these behind-the-scenes meetings.
They're talking about things where artificial intelligence is now writing speeches for politicians. Did you hear about that?
I sure did. Can you imagine that? I mean, that might be helpful. However, there are a lot of other things associated with this whole overview and agenda, so to speak, that aren't so acceptable. But he says that this is definitely leading, in his mind, to a transhumanist future. It will be dominated by our artificial intelligence, have limited resources, and a lot more control than we have ever seen before if we continue on this path.
I keep thinking of 2001 Space Odyssey, how the computer HAL just kind of went amok and did his thing.
It's very scary. We could become much like the Twilight Zone, the obsolete man. Now, when we come back, we'll be talking about the possibility of reversing this course, and he'll take us on what some might think is a dire tour of our future where AI rules and digital currency just totally shreds our privacy. But we have to be alert to all these things. He says the time is short, but there is hope.
Now, Frank is primarily a filmmaker. How did he get interested in all this?
Well, the topics that he researched and was producing videos and films on led him down this pathway. He's in Germany. He works with Tanya Madenford. They've teamed up with the Addiction Screen production company, and they're producing quite a bit of material and films, and he's very, very serious about this.
It's tremendous work. His website is his name, frankjacob.com?
Correct, and screenaddiction.com.
And he just is one of a kind when it comes to this, isn't he?
He sure is, and he does a lot of traveling and presenting, and I believe he'll be at the Conscious Life Expo in L.A.
Okay, I'll be out there.
Yes, the first week of February, yes. So you'll be able to say hello to him.
I'll look forward to that. That's right, absolutely. Do you have any conferences coming up for yourself, Cheryl?
Not anytime soon.
Still held back from COVID?
Yes, but I don't know. I'm not too wild about flying right now with all that's happening. I think I'm going to wait until the airlines get it together a little bit better.
Well, if they ever do. But we're going to come back in a moment with your second part. And then next week, Cheryl has a full second part of this incredible topic. And then in the last hour, we open up the phone lines for you. Next hour, we'll take your calls with Cheryl Jones in an open line forum, so make sure you're part of the program. When we come back, we'll get into part 2 of her story of this incredible story of the power of artificial intelligence. And then a month from now, she'll be interviewing another person dealing with this topic as well, because it just won't go away. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you along with Cheryl Jones. We're going to take calls with Cheryl next hour. Cheryl, how long do you think you could go without your smartphone?
If I had everything else I needed, I could do pretty well, I think. It would be tough. You couldn't continue life as you know it. You couldn't. You'd have to go into a different mode because you certainly couldn't keep up with everything that you're doing. But I don't know. As far as a track of time on that, I wouldn't want to guess, and I'm sure I would not do as well as in my mind on the outset that I think I would.
Well, you and I are from a different era where we didn't have cell phones right away. It took a couple of years, and then once we got into it, did you ever have a little pager? Remember those?
Oh, yes. Do you remember when they first came out, how big they were?
Yep, absolutely. And cell phones. I had one of these Motorola's and it looked like I was in the Army with it.
And before that, I mean, gosh, the difference in having this kind of technology and the way we had to work when we didn't have any technology hardly at all, except the wire services and hardwired phones in the newsroom to work with, and then what you did on the street. This is incredible. I wish the young people of today knew how blessed and lucky they are to have all of these things.
I don't think they could get by without their phones for even a day.
No, not even a computer. You had to type everything on a typewriter the hard way.
What's a typewriter?
That's right. I know.
Remember those days in the television news business? We had those 5-part snap-out pieces of paper where you had your scripts. You'd type them up, and then the director would get one, a producer would get one, the anchor person would get one.
Oh, absolutely. Everybody had one.
I love it. Okay, let's go into part 2.
Okay, George. I'll continue my conversation with filmmaker Frank Jacob on the coming age of digitalization. Will it be utopian or dystopian? And Frank says most people don't really know, and some don't want to know what's going on, that digital currency is being tested around the world to track every purchase or transaction you make, from health to financial, is the goal of those planning this scenario. That artificial intelligence, some claim, could replace this history that we always thought was safeguarded in our living brains. But this plan would put us in a very dangerous scenario for our future. Now, can we chart a new course where life as we know it still exists? Frank says we can, but it'll take all of us rising up into being the best human beings we've ever imagined.
Frank, let's talk about the CBDCs, the central banking digital currencies, and how this fits in with the social credit scores.
I mean, central banking has been all about control. So you can be sure that their version of digital currency, which might borrow some of the technology of blockchain, although even that I've been reading is probably even dubious. They're probably going to go beyond that into quantum level computing, which can actually apparently even crack the blockchain already. And some people say that doesn't even really matter. But the fact is, the key word here is control. The central bankers will not just lay down and go away. They've built up the whole global economy and all of this stuff we've been talking about, this Internet of Bodies. It's all hinging on control. And if they can control our currency by tying it directly into our biometric ID, which is where they're moving, then they've breached the final frontier. Then it's over. There really is no way to have any kind of anonymity any longer. I mean, the idea right now that you could still go out with cash in your hand and make a transaction that nobody except you and the person you're making the transaction knows about is going to be history. history. Even people that are talking about QFS, the quantum financial, Nasara, Jazara, all these fantasies, right? They're thinking this is going to be great because the quantum computer is going to manage all the transactions, but they're leaving out that important aspect, and that is that it's still going to tie you directly with your biometric ID to a quantifiable account. So that means every transaction that you do is going to be trackable and traceable. The other factor with respect to the idea of digital currency is that they can make them programmable. And this is the key word because this ties into the idea of social credits. And right now, China is kind of on the cutting edge in terms of leading the way to where this is going. I mean, China essentially is the country that is on the forefront of social credit systems, meaning to tie your own personal ID through facial recognition, through biometric recognition, through sensors that they've placed all around in China. So this social credit system is a very important aspect of what they're tying into the green economy, the whole idea of stakeholder capitalism. So they want to be able to monitor every one of your transactions in terms of how green it is. So making a currency programmable means that they can actually issue you a certain amount of social credits every month directly linked to your biometric ID, which tracks you. Say you're still driving a car that runs on diesel, and they say, well, diesel is too much of a greenhouse gas polluter. You're only allowed to drive maximum 50 gallons a month on diesel. And that's it. That's your quota. And say you've gone through the 50 gallons and you have 2 weeks left in the month. Guess what? You're not going to be driving anywhere because your quota has been linked to your programmable ID, which has been linked to your bank account and your biometric ID. So it's over. All of these things can be extended into other territories. Like say, you only got the vaccine once and your state government decides to mandate that everyone has to have a booster shot because they've now declared some new version of a virus has entered your state or your country. And in order for the country to be safe, the health experts have told your leaders that you need to have this booster shot. That's going to be tied to your programmable ID as well. So if you do not get that booster shot, they could just shut you down completely and say, okay, if you don't want to get the booster shot, no more purchases, period.
Oh, it's very, very scary. What about the food access? I mean, they want us to eat insect burgers. They're building bug farms, and new fake meats and vegetarian foods are already being aggressively pushed. What do you see there?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is all part of it. The idea of the fake meats is something which is gaining, again, popularity with respect to carbon footprint. They're actually going to be synthetically printed with 3D printers, so they're going to look like meat. They're going to taste like meat, and, all the things that people like to see when they're eating a rare steak or something. They're going to have part of that as being programmed by the 3D printer that are manufacturing these different products. There's something called the Bovie scale. The Bovie scale is something which actually measures the photonic energy signature of foods. And every single natural food has a kind of Bovie scale. And our bodies function on a Bovie scale of 6,500. And if you look at the Bovie scale, of really supercharged foods like super blue-green algae is a superfood which has a very, very high Bovie count. It's actually giving your body more energy than you already have. Well, the reverse is true for foods that are below the 6,500. Some examples of those foods would be like sugar-based foods, like Coca-Cola is something like 2,000, right? It's toxic. I mean, it's death. So the thing about these fake foods is that they're not natural foods. They're going to be looked at by your body as toxic. And, if their agenda really is global depopulation and building into society kind of a whole sickness curve, of course, then the pharmaceutical corporations are going to profit. It's building their customers of the future.
Frank, once implemented and more people finally realize what has been done to them through the social credit scores and the central banking digital currencies, is there any possible way that this could be reversed?
The only thing that we can do against it is we can realize that we are actually sentient beings, that we actually have very, very powerful abilities that are dormant and locked within our DNA. What does that mean? It means that we have in us these amazing abilities, but we need to realize it. If we don't realize it before it's too late, yes, AI will annihilate humanity, and Klaus Schwab and his buddies will manifest that timeline of transhumanism, and it'll eliminate this other timeline that's still out there right now, this organic timeline that will lead us to this other world that we've been fantasizing and dreaming about for a long, long time.
Let's talk about transhumanism. Who is behind it? How did it start? And how would you see our society looking?
Barbara Marx Hubbard comes to mind. She is somebody that was very early on proclaiming even 2030 and even 2020 as being a milestone date that would usher in the exponential change toward this new kind of transhumanist society. You know, she's not alone, however, because a lot of the people that were part of her sort of foundations and her research think tanks are people like Ray Kurzweil, who's the head of, research at Google. He's another one of these people that believe that the human genome is limited and it's time to take our next evolutionary leap from carbon-based beings into silicon-based beings. So they're feverishly trying to figure out a way to actually download our brain because they believe that the essence of humanity is within your skull. They don't really believe in a soul. They don't believe in the idea of an extended consciousness that transcends into other dimensions. So for them, everything is 3D. Another proponent of it is Yuval Harari. And he's talking about where we've reached the era of where we're able to do the surveillance under our skin. And what he's talking about there is directly within our bloodstream. So the idea of us being this inviolable human being with a soul that is, has sovereignty, this time he loudly and widely proclaims is over, that we're moving into a time now where everything is going to be quantifiable. It's all about data. So your brain is going to be digitized. Your state of health, your state of mental health, all these things are going to be sync points for them to log into in terms of how to quantify who you are, or what they would like to sell us in terms of who we are. Now, you could take it even a step further because if you're looking at the work of Dr. David Nixon and something called the Kingston Report, she's been putting out information based on the actual patents of Pfizer. And what David Nixon has found is something which ties into discoveries that were made a few years back where scientists created what they called the first living robots. These are robots that are on a nano scale. They're calling them new life forms. That means that they can actually inject what they call xenobots into your body, and they can become self-assembling little robots. They find themselves inside of your blood. They connect with each other. They form and build little machines, and they use those machines to traverse your body under your skin and make alterations. I mean, it sounds like absolute crazy science fiction, right? Except David Nixon started noticing, he was doing autopsies, that a lot of the people that were coming in to his, I guess you call it a laboratory, he was pulling things out of their bloodstreams that were very, very unusual, like things that were constructed that actually became flammable if exposed to electricity or heat. I mean, these are not natural products that were found inside of people that died suddenly. So he began to actually look under a microscope at the contents of what's inside of these vials that are, what they are using to inject into billions of people on the planet right now. He discovered that if you look at it under a microscope, you might see what looks like crystalline formations. But what was interesting is he decided to kind of film those over a long period of time. And then an interesting thing happened. He sped up the footage, and what he saw for the first time ever is shocking. You actually see these crystalline formations become animated. They actually turn into little robots with arms, appendages, and they build crystalline structures that give off light and signals right within the actual material. And the crazy part was whenever he exposed them to electromagnetic radiation, like 5G or 4G radiation, the activity would be going along fine. The minute he sealed them off and put them into an isolated chamber without any electromagnetic radiation, they disappeared. When he put them back under the electromagnetic radiation, they reappeared and they continued building from where they left off. We're talking about the actual technology to rebuild us and rewire us without having to even do anything else except inject these gene-altering robots directly into our bodies. Take a look at the people around you right now, Cheryl. That's the final generation of natural human beings left on this planet if these people go ahead and realize their diabolical plan.
What is your takeaway message for people from what you said tonight?
everyone, I think, can understand that if their currency is tied to their biometric ID, their idea of privacy is history. The info war, the currency war, the Great Reset's tied to that. We need to be looking at that, and we need to do everything we can to try and stop it, Cheryl.
Absolutely. Frank, what's coming up next for you, and where can our listeners find you and keep up with your projects and film, webinars, events, and so on?
Well, I'm going to be in Los Angeles at the Conscious Life Expo doing a live talk, and that's going to be in February. Tanya Maidenford and I and our Screen Addiction Film Company has other plans to continue releasing material out there. We have a website to see all of our films. I mean, you could go to the screenaddiction.com website, or you could go to my website, frankjacob.com. Might be the easiest to remember.
Frank, thank you so much for being with us tonight and for all that you do to keep people informed and to research these various topics that are of utmost importance to everyone.
Thanks for having me, Cheryl.
Well, you get to tell Cheryl he's got a passion for what he does.
He sure does. He sure does. It's pretty scary and concerning, too. And I have to say, an ant sandwich doesn't sound all that good to me. What about you?
No, never did, never will.
No. And it just gives you chills down your spine, knowing that some physicians have discovered under a microscope some self-assembling little robots in some people's blood draws. And, George, I truly believe that people, especially our listeners, want their privacy to be protected and maintain their own control of their own brains and lives and bodies and bank accounts, too. I know I do. I certainly want to go to the store and buy steaks or chicken or whatever I want to without worrying that I'm beyond a quota. And if I get into my car, I want to know that I can drive more than 2 miles to my destination. And according to Frank, it's up to all of us as to which timeline and which choices we make, but we have to become aware and do what we can to try to stay on the right path. We'll spend the rest of our lives living in a different time zone.
Cheryl, what do you think of driverless cars?
I don't like them. Pardon me. I think
nor do I. Or driverless trucks. I don't want to see any truck drivers lose their jobs.
I don't see how, with such split-second decisions in so many scenarios, when there's so much traffic, that a computer is going to be able to do any critical thinking.
Absolutely. Up next, open lines with Cheryl. I'll hang around too, but primarily ask her questions about just about anything she's covered over the years with us. And, of course, you can talk to her about the weather. You can handle that, right, Cheryl?
Well, yes. but you know, they might have some comments or their own experiences. A lot of people are experiencing a lot of things that we're talking about tonight in terms of being on the front edge of it. This has been a long time in planning. This is not a surprise or an overnight development that we're talking about here. It's getting attention, getting more media attention now, but I think people are starting to wake up.
Up next, Open Lines on Coast to Coast. Welcome back to the Open Line portion of Coast to Coast. Cheryl Jones is here. I'll hang around too and make your call and see what's going on Coast to Coast. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, along with Cheryl Jones, as we take your open line calls. Cheryl appears on our program monthly with incredible stories, and the year is underway, Cheryl.
It sure is. It seems like something is happening almost every minute of every day, and no small news headlines either. They're big ones.
Yep, absolutely. How do you feel about 2023?
Well, let's hope it gets better. Some of the censorship, I have to tell you, is very concerning with what has just happened with Newsmax, which I think that is not a good move. But we'll watch that and see what happens. But I just don't think it's right for this kind of thing to be happening in America, where our choices are taken away, regardless of where you stand on every issue.
Well, that's true. I guess the DirecTV has taken them off their channel.
Yes, they have. And DirecTV had, I believe, $2.7 billion in profits last year, so I don't think it was a financial move. Of course, I don't know. But it's just concerning when voices are silenced, regardless of where anybody stands on any issue. Everybody should have a choice to hear and see whatever they want to and make their own decisions.
Well, what we're losing in this country is the ability to talk and discuss without people getting bitter, hatred, and very upset about things. I mean, when there are two sides of the camp, but they don't get together anymore.
Open civil debate is what is needed because, in my view, if something is secret and you can't talk about it and it's taboo, which now we know, you could sit down and just list a whole bunch of topics that you are not free to talk about in an open public setting. And that is concerning. This is not the way it needs to be, in my view, in America. It wasn't the way it used to be. And if we could have open public debate, then things could be flushed out. But if there's secrecy, voices are silenced, you can't see this research, you can't see that research, and you have to do this and not that, then that's very concerning. And the people who have been censored and deplatformed, and just like we're seeing now with Newsmax, what is it that they're doing that someone doesn't like? There's a minimum, there were only 3 moderately conservative networks to begin with. They already took off OAN, now it's Newsmax, so now Fox. And they're not all totally conservative. They have varying views as well. But on the other side, there's 22? And I don't think that anyone, no matter what their position is, if they're, really thinking straight, would be okay with these voices silenced and only having one narrative that is dominant like that.
Strange times. Let's go to the calls for you. Brendan in Austin, Texas, to get us started. Hey, Brendan, go ahead.
Hey, thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Cheryl, I love your meteorologist background. I think everybody should look at the weather. People would be more humbled with the Earth if they understood what's going on with the weather around them. So my point with calling tonight is that with AI, hopefully in your next interview you can work this in if you have the opportunity. But I wanted to throw out this idea of artificial intelligence being used to work on antibiotics. And it's already been done. It hasn't been super successful yet. They're working on it a lot. But I think in the future that we're going to have AI that will find these chemicals that we would take a long time to find because it takes a lot of trial and error, and the AI can just sort through all these data points and blow through them all. And with that thought, I'll move on to just one other thing that you guys were talking about, the campaign AI, the AI writing campaign speeches. And I was thinking that if you could have AI that would actively monitor the politicians as they're speaking, like imagine a debate and the politician says something, and then in the background, a big screen has like an X, and it has like the video of them saying the exact lie that they just said. I think that would be great, like especially live. And the AI would be able to sort through all of that and show you that. And all right, thanks, guys. I just want to say one quick thing. Howard Bloom was great yesterday. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Well, Howard's got his supporters and he's got his detractors, too.
He sure does. And that's what would be great if we had open public debate in this country right now, which we don't have enough of. And it's fine if you feel differently from me, and it's fine with you if I feel differently from you. And that's the way it should be. But that's just not the freedom that we're seeing here with all of the censorship. The censorship has been like a slow boiling frog, to use an old phrase, but that's really what it's been like for all these years, and people are just now beginning to see exactly what is going on because it's becoming so blatant. But we really do have to wake up to it before it's a point of no return.
What's happening with all these carjackings and car thefts and robberies and things like that all around the country? It's out of control.
Yes, but doesn't it seem like it's just part of the whole progression of what we've been through with the defunding of the police instead of just taking money perhaps to improve the recruiting and the vetting and the training of police officers? The defunding, I mean, what could possibly go wrong there? And then the lack of the law and justice that we have with criminals going free. I mean, who would have ever thought in this country we'd have the kind of crime that we have, and nothing is done about it in terms of overall accountability? So it's just a progression, and the carjack, whatever it is, whatever crime, it's almost like there is an underground network of criminals, and they're called to action wherever the hot spot is.
Let's go to Ace in Buffalo, New York. Ace, welcome back.
How you doing tonight, George?
Great, thank you.
I got a question for your guest. I was wondering, have you ever heard of target individuals? And if you have, are you familiar with those individuals that are targeted being connected to a hive mind, which is connected to artificial quantum computers?
And Ace, I couldn't hear you in terms of talking to who?
Cheryl's name, right?
Cheryll, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand.
What was your question, though?
Yes, everything you said. I heard you say targeted individuals.
I'm sorry, is that better?
Go ahead, start again.
Okay. My question for Cheryll is if you have ever heard of targeted individuals, and if you have, are you familiar with TIs being connected to a hive mind team, which consists of being hooked up to super quantum computers, which is artificial intelligence. Also, with having remote neural monitoring being broadcasted through them with artificial intelligence.
I've not heard of that, but you've heard of targeted individuals, Cheryl.
Oh, of course, targeted individuals. And I didn't really get all of your question, but why don't you tell us what you're thinking about? Because it sounds like you've done a lot of research.
I have. I've been a target individual for over 20 years. I have my own network I network with online around the world. I work with PAX International, which is a target individual community. It has a YouTube page and a website that has YouTube, target individual news. I work for Ella Free, volunteer for her on a target individual hotline. But target individuals are connected to a hive mind team, which consists of psychiatric doctors, mental health doctors, and law enforcement, alphabet agencies, as well as having target individuals being connected to AI quantum computers.
I've not heard of that, Cheryl. Have you?
Actually, he mentioned helicopters. Yes, I've heard of some people thinking that they were being targeted by helicopters, but and if I understood him correctly, he said connected to a computer, and I think he meant remote control of some sort. Is that correct?
His phone's a little. I don't want to go back to it.
Yeah. So I think a lot of things are. Who knows what's going on around us? Every day it's something new that we never could have imagined. So I wouldn't rule anything out. And it's all about who has control of the technology, and that's where we're going with the AI. Hopefully there will be some regulations and oversight of the ethics in place.
Let's go to Ed in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hello, Eddie. Welcome.
George, where have all the phone calls gone? George has answered everyone. When will you ever learn?
You remember those days?
Oh, that was a great song you had the other night. I love it. Jacobs, I'm so happy he hit this money thing because it's so much deeper than anyone realizes in artificial intelligence. The control, they will even not let you say buy. You can buy a sweatsuit, but you can't buy ammunition for your gun. They'll get around the Second Amendment. They'll tell you it's total control. In China, someone doesn't like the shirt you're wearing. They call the authorities and say his dog is keeping you up at night, even if the dog isn't barking. And they come and take your animals. You don't get any say-so. I think they'll have us at that point, and it's only 3 or 4 weeks potentially away. It's very scary, the thing I've been most concerned about. And Cheryl, one of the most important thing tonight is so wonderful. There's been a couple of them. Herndon, of all things, on earlier. He has chemtrails are not contrails. he's got some big stuff there about all the insects being killed, 70-80%, and so forth. And what I want to ask Cheryl is, Elon Musk has come out about artificial intelligence in 3 or 4 different short videos, and he gets choked up about it. And he even predicted if you had robots that were made into soldiers, you know, they could end up wiping all of us out in 2 or 3 years if you don't, what Cheryl just said, have some kind of control. Now, he's going to have a robot for sale at Tesla within maybe 1 year with artificial intelligence. He knows more about it than almost anyone. And he's trying to point out that what we think we know about is so pathetic, that it is so much more advanced. And I'm wondering if Cheryl might not could talk to him, since he feels so strongly about it, and convince him to be interviewed somewhat to elaborate, George, on your show about his concept of this artificial intelligence. And within 2 months of him predicting about soldiers, a lot of people don't know this. In Japan, they got 4 artificial intelligence soldiers that were hooked to a satellite and all, and in the laboratory, and all of a sudden they killed 29 scientists before they could get to them and take them apart.
A lot of things going on in China, Cheryl.
It's very concerning. I think that's an excellent idea that we interview Elon, but he is very, very concerned, and I've heard him talk about the regulations and the ethics, and he is concerned about that. And just like our caller said, he does seem to get very, very emotional about it at times, and I'm afraid that we might have robots on the way that are going to outthink us. And once we cross that bridge, I mean, there's no turning back. When a robot, when your doctor can be a robot, and a robot can manage your bank account, or charge you for something that you did wrong, or jaywalking, or whatever. It's pretty serious, and I think maybe, you know, Frank's concern is merited.
Let's go to Joe, Long Island, New York. Hey, Joseph, go ahead.
Hey, Cheryl, I want to just bring up 2 things. First, I was listening to the David Knight Show podcast earlier this week, and he was talking about these smart cities, smart zones, and he brought up Australia wants to do things where they'd have people corralled into a 5 to 10 minute zone where you could just walk, but the coffee shop will be their coffee shop, their choice, not your choice. And then they would do vertical farming where they would have these massive, tall buildings with hogs on each floor, and that would get rid of the independent farmers. And this is in Australia, so they're contradicting the Crocodile Dundee, aura around Australia. And the second thing is I started to read a book called The Surveillance State by Lisa Lin, and it's following a filmmaker in China to start the book. And he's going into a gas station, and all of a sudden these gas stations have like barbed wire where you can only go through a facial recognition thing to buy gasoline for your car. Jeez. So I was thinking about this. First of all, if you have a car, you have to buy gasoline for it. So they're criminalizing an activity that's, you have to buy gas for the car, and they're contradicting the idea of having these conveniences where, a Google map that would help you drive better. So they're contradicting the earlier use of AI with the later use, which is more restrictive.
Cheryl, are you concerned about a social credit score in this country?
Yes, I am. I think we have been, as I mentioned before, just like the slow boil of the frog, because so many things have been going on. He mentioned facial recognition. A wrong man was put in jail in Georgia because the facial recognition got it wrong. And that's just one small example. But going all the way back to the Obamacare, where the way that was set up through the IRS and being fined if someone didn't have the proper insurance. I mean, that was a part of all of this in terms of how the electronics and the tracking and all of this stuff can be used. So it's, I think it's a very serious thing. I am concerned.
Well, it's happening in China, and they're using it in a big way, aren't they?
Oh, they absolutely are. And as our caller mentioned, I think we don't know what's not being reported either. That's the whole other aspect of it, because what we see may not be the entire picture relating to what's really going on. We just see what we see, and, it is what it is.
Yep, absolutely.
And there's so much censorship. I keep going back to censorship, but that's been in place for so long, and it's so critical to everything that's happening, because with suppression of information or twisting the truth or giving one narrative and silencing others, there's nothing good about that process.
When you talk to Frank Jacobs, is he concerned about this too?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It all fits in. They couldn't, these kinds of things could not have been developed had censorship not been in place for decades, really, in a progressive and stage-like fashion. But now here we are, and it's been molded and manipulated to this point where the technology is at a point where just about anything can be done. Now, again, it goes back to the point of who is in control. You have good versus evil, basically, in our world, and who's going to win out. I mean, there's so many good things that could be done and are being done with the artificial intelligence in the medical field, for instance. And yeah, wouldn't it be great if you had somebody to write your speeches?
We're going to come back and take final calls with Cheryll Jones in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with Cheryll Jones. Our final segment. Cheryl's website is her name with 2 L's, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Cheryll, what do you got planned for us in the months ahead? Not in Feb, because that's part 2 of this project. What else you got? What are you looking at?
It is part 2. However, George, it will be a different guest.
Right.
With Rebecca Hardcastle-Wright on neural rights and free will, keeping your mind free. And that'll be very interesting. We're the same topic, but we're going to be talking about a whole different aspect of it and how you can protect your neural rights.
I got an email from someone who wanted to know what your Thanksgiving show is going to be like.
Oh, my Thanksgiving? Well, I'd like to know, too. I think maybe we need to bring in a psychic and see if we can figure that out.
When Thanksgiving comes, I want you to remember tonight, because I'm going to bring it up and say, do you remember when I talked about Thanksgiving back in January? Here we are already. Tell me how fast you think it'll go by in November when we talk about it.
Oh, absolutely. Time is just flying. I don't know if it's a factor relating to getting older and, everything is relative. I don't know with every day that passes. But now with all of the technology, everything that we've talked about tonight, the artificial intelligence and all the happenings around us, happening so fast and changes, you have to keep your head on a swivel to keep up with everything that's happening, and then you miss a lot of it because obviously everything's not reported out there. So there's so much going on that we don't know about, and it's kind of a crazy world. And let's hope that, as we talked about earlier, the good forces win over the evil.
Once you're certified as a meteorologist, do you have to get retrained, or are you a meteorologist for your life?
Well, once you have that accomplishment, I mean, no one can take it away from you. You have the degree, and I did go through the process of earning the AMS seal and the NWA seal that are used commonly on television these days. When I first started out, that wasn't really much of a factor, and then as time went on, things changed. But I went back to school and earned my degree in meteorology while I was in Denver working at the CBS station in news there. So that's a long process. Yeah, you need to keep it up in terms of staying involved and current with the organizations to maintain your seals of approval.
Ah, okay. Let's go to the phones. Gary in Pennsylvania, welcome to the show. Hey, Gary, go ahead.
Thanks for taking my call, George. I always appreciate it, and you have a great show. I just have a comment, a quote, a comment, a question for your guest, Cheryl.
Okay.
My quote is there was this Paulo Freire, I believe his name was, and he once said, those who teach learn in the act of teaching, and those who learn teach in the act of learning. And I've learned a lot tonight listening to your show. It's been a great show. And I just have a feeling this year, maybe I'm wrong, but, with all, with Comet and asteroid over there within weeks, maybe I'm wrong, but George, you've been doing this a lot longer than you know your stuff, but I don't know how long, this is something that's really commonplace. But my question for your guest, Cheryl, is this. She said we'd have two possible societies with these people that are planning these things. One would be a utopian organic. One would be a dystopian synthetic. Years ago on this show, they used to mention this Lord Maitreya. Lord Maitreya, he was like some enlightened spiritual master.
They thought he was the Antichrist, right?
Oh, I remember there was a Benjamin Cream that used to talk about. But,
yep.
But anyway, George, not to cut you off, but for your guest, I'd like to know is, do you think this Lord Maitreya will be an actual human being, or do you think it'll be like an artificial intelligence type figure?
Well, let me brief you, Cheryl, that Benjamin Creme, who has passed on, used to be on our program as a guest, claims that he represented the Lord Maitreya, that some people believed was the Antichrist. Who knows? But have you heard anything about that?
I've heard about it, but I couldn't answer your question in terms of what I think about it because I don't know. It's anybody's guess, and you mentioned the timelines. Of course, he did say that there could be multiple timelines, unlimited, really, with in one sense of the matter. And also, there is another story that we didn't cover tonight, and that is the Guardians, the Guardians of the Looking Glass, which supposedly are a group of guardians that are watching over this to try to set everything right, and it's a controversial topic, and Frank didn't know whether that's true or not, but that is there. But we shall see whether the forces that went out and are the strongest and have the control also have ethics to take us in the right direction. I don't know. In answer to your question, I wish I did.
Let's go to Cornelius in Alexandria, Louisiana. Welcome to the show, Cornelius.
Hey there, George and Cheryl. Boy, I tell you, you've got the greatest guests, George, and the greatest callers and listeners. Cheryl,
well, thank you.
I'm glad you mentioned these guardians of the Looking Glass because I'm a Bible man, so they call me the God, Guns, and Gold man, the Bible, Bullets, and Beans man. I think we're in the end times, Cheryl, and this. To me, it's Antichrist technology, this AI stuff. And I look at shows like, if you ever saw The Person of Interest, where these two AIs, one was good and one was bad, and they were battling each other. But, you're right, Cheryl. We have to have our minds right not to accept this technology because it's no good. Brandon, that guy that started off the show, he was saying, oh, it's good. AI is going to help us and everything like that. No, AI is no good. Don't accept it. I think it, and I don't know if you know this, I think it'll lead to the mark of the beast. So that's my question for you. Thank you, George, and thank you, Cheryl. God bless you.
Mark of the beast with artificial intelligence, huh? What do you think, Cheryl?
There is an effort to see if everything could be put under the skin. And with the experimental medical chemicals being planned to be included in our food and in the air and in the water and everything else, it is concerning because all of these kinds of things would just lead to the ability to control us, and we'd have no control over that.
Let's go to Joe in Monterey, California. Welcome to the show. Hey, Joe, go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call, George.
How have you been?
Oh, busy. Busy. I was away for about 45 days visiting a friend.
I hope everything was workable.
Oh, well, yeah, it was well spent.
Good.
About this, the mark of the beast, and all of the things that you've shown to the world on Coast to Coast, ETs are behind it. They had us build the AI. They had us build an infrastructure of surveillance. They inject us. They implant us. They experiment on us. They have all the DNA, all the information they need, and now they can control us with their technology complete.
That's it?
Yeah.
Yes. What have you had as far as a personal experience? You're very aware, so I assume that you have been paying attention with the things in your life that fit into this, and it's kind of the natural progression along the way.
Well, I met a few people that were in contact with the negative ones, and they're negative people too, and they are very nefarious, and they do feel that they're superior, and I don't believe they believe in God. I think it's a very technocratic and scientific orientation, and they really feel that they have us, and it's very strange because there are spiritual people on the planet, and they are trying to do the best they can to wake people up and teach them spiritual means to raise their vibration, to get in control of their life, but also to contact higher beings that can oversee a win-win scenario for us.
Yes, and as Frank alluded to, with this process of transhumanism, with becoming more intertwined with the brain becoming more intertwined with AI, there is that concept that once that happens, that the soul is not transferred from the human to the being or to the robot, and therefore you no longer have control over your body or own your body, and someone else or entity can control it. You know, who knows how that will actually process. But I go back to what I mentioned earlier about the concern that Elon Musk has brought up, and that is concern over regulations needed for oversight with being able to have some ethics in these whole processes. And that'll be some of what we'll be talking about next month when I interview Rebecca Hardcastle-Wright on neural rights and keeping your mind free with free will.
Cheryl, do you think voice to text is artificial intelligence?
Well, I'll tell you, I've had some voice-to-text scenarios where it bore no resemblance to what I actually said, and it seems like it always goes downhill. It's it can put in words that you would never, voice.
Or it picks up sounds in the background.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You can have your phone laying on a desk, and then Siri will say, "I didn't get that." I'll check into that.
Let's go to Linda in the state of Washington, west of the Rockies. Hey, Linda, go ahead.
Hi, George. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I listened to Jeff Rance, and he said that the Department of Defense owns the vaccines and contracted with Pfizer and the other ones to create what they wanted.
No, they don't own the vaccines. The vaccines are owned by the big pharmaceutical companies, and they are making a fortune. You there?
He insisted he has the proof, but anyways, I also was going to say that we're already on this credit system. No matter where I go, what I do, I get a text, how was your visit, or blah, 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 it's always a survey or some kind of, feedback.
Well, those are telemarketers. That's not artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has got a different kind of power to it, Cheryl. And I don't agree with Cornelius. I don't think it's the mark of the beast.
Well, if they want to, we'll see what happens. Let's hope not. But it is concerning that they would want to put this chip or identifying information underneath your skin so that you wouldn't be able to get away from it. And there is that thing of contract tracing and everything that is possible that we don't even know what's out there, because we get the information long after these things have been developed.
Well, I'm not in favor of chips in your body, that's for sure.
No, I'm not either. But there was a story about American citizens being targeted with a secret COVID decree violation score during the COVID scenario, the pandemic, so that they could track that. And that was reportedly by a group called PredictWise. And
they came out with a warning today that if you got the Pfizer vaccine, don't get the flu shot with it, because you could have a stroke.
Well, there's a lot of concerning reporting on and data out there, but you can't find it on mainstream news. You do have to go beyond that and go into independent sources to look for this information. But people need to keep up with that. And one thing that Frank Jacob, my guest tonight, did point out was that he felt that we still had hope, and we could still keep this on the right track. As we mentioned, there are a lot of good things that happen from this, medically and otherwise, if the intent and the end game is good. But just learn all you can, do your own research, and help your local representatives and politicians become as informed as possible, so that when those decisions are made in the political arena, they're going to be made in the right way.
Absolutely. Cheryl, we will talk to you the end of next month.
Can't wait.
Looking forward to it indeed. Cheryl's website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. We've got a great program for you for the rest of the weeks with our weekend people, and then we'll hit the deck again on Monday. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladouceur, Stephanie Smith, Chris Boros, Tim Banal, George Knapp, and Ian Punnett, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.